Ethan. Oh
Oh,
shit,
very
we all got
nice.
glasses. Holy shit.
A bunch of intellectuals over here
Yeah, man.
considering things. I don't know how glasses got associated with that though. That doesn't make a lot of
Right?
sense. Like, yeah, you can't see worth shit. You must be smart. Well, I guess it's because people were reading back in the day. Maybe it's a lifestyle, and your eyes get bad by the candlelight. Who knows? Who knows? I don't know. How you guys doing?
I don't know if people still even read anymore. Well, we read your book, but it's like it's a bit iffy on the reading these days.
Yeah, well, men don't read. I mean, that's the thing. It's like the book got to number one in sports, but I don't know what that means compared to some YA novel, with J Law type protagonist that probably does crazy numbers. And what ends up happening, so the book got to number one and it briefly supplanted Moneyball. And I thought to myself when I
Wow.
saw that, like, Moneyball, that's the last time men read. That's like the last book. Like, internet porn wasn't at the level to completely supplant reading as an activity for men, and Moneyball was the last one. And there hasn't been anyone since that point. And eventually Moneyball will be back at, number one still. That's the last one. That's my general theory though, is like internet porn, men stopped reading, bada bing, bada boom. That's what happened.
They've
I
been reading
don't.
it for 20 years too, apparently. So just the
Well, I
same
think that's
book.
what the yeah, it's it's the last one.
Yeah, I don't think your theory is baseless. So I think you may have a point.
We'll see.
Yeah, man. So how's it going, man? Like how does it feel? Number one published book, man. How does it feel?
It's cool. I mean, are we recording? Is this part of the show, or what's the
Oh, yeah, we're recording,
All right.
but fuck it.
Marcus is a master. Marcus is a master editor, so
Yeah,
it'll all
like,
make
Well, that's
sense.
because
Yeah.
I was about to say it feels, incredible to be so much better than everybody else. No, I don't. Um, yeah, it's cool. It's mostly cool just because you're afraid of failure. Like, I was afraid that I would come out with the book and then it's just not even discussed, and it's a big disappointment. You feel like you're letting people down potentially, who are also invested in it. And, this funny thing happens where other people um, make a lot of effort behind the scenes in order to get a book over the finish line, and they don't get any kind of credit, but they also don't own the failure. And so I then want to just make them feel good about having worked with me and feel good about me as an investment. Like, I don't want to let them down. And so the fact that it got picked up, it got talked about, it sold pretty well as far as I can see. That's all great. It's just a relief, just like the Warriors winning a championship. It's more relief than it is a thrill, I suppose.
That's pretty good, man. It's funny talking a little bit back when you said men don't read. I did notice. I think the first in your acknowledgments of the five people you first acknowledged, four of them were women. So I can tell you're a smart guy.
I didn't even think about that. I can't even remember who I acknowledged, other than my wife, who took our son to Mexico for 2 weeks, and that was a vacation I was supposed to be on, and I just said I got to get this done, and she was a hero. She was a trooper, and she took a crying baby on an airplane.
So
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 yeah.
it was like the opposite of Rodman's 72 hours in Vegas.
I mean, hey, he's lived. Hey, he had a best-selling book. I read that as a
Hmm.
kid, by the way.
I remember the cover. Yeah.
With the crazy fonts. You ever read it? It's got like different size font and different. You might see some Dan Gilbert style Comic Sans at various points of it.
I knew that was going to be in there.
I always thought that was pretty cool. It was dismissed as gimmicky at the time, but I remember reading it as a kid, and I just skipped right to the parts where he was having sex with Madonna. Like, that's what I skipped to when I was a. That was pretty shocking. But I also thought it's pretty cool that they're just changing the font all over the place. I've never seen something like this.
Hold on.
Ethan Strauss joining us.
So why didn't you do it? You should have had big Katie Sucks Comic Sans somewhere in this.
Well, I've never pulled down, 20 rebounds in a game. I think that Dennis Rodman in the 1990s might have had a certain level of cachet that I've not gotten to yet. But if I have a big hit, then all bets are off. Then the font's going insane. Different colors, upside down, whatever.
I'm gonna hold you to that, Ethan. By the way.
Ethan, tell me about how the process works. Is in terms of just the writing, is it, hey, I've got all these articles together and how can I stream this into longer narratives? Or because Marcus and I and Kellen, when we talked about like some of the articles kind of read, or some of the chapters kind of read like articles, and then some of them kind of read like the longer prose that you normally get out of a book. Like, what's the process behind turning your work as a journalist writing pieces into a longer form?
1 second, my dog is barking because we don't have a dog door. Let me just let him in, and I will come up with a half cogent response to that. Part of the process is finding the breaks in the action between when your dog's barking. 1 second. Otto, come on, buddy.
I love it. I love it.
Hey man, the only pets I've ever owned were Pokemon, so I've never had this stress before.
I had a fish and a pet turtle. And the only reason I had the turtle is because Dad found it on the side of the road once. So,
your dad's a very sweet man, by the way.
Okay. So, at first there was this idea of maybe making it more chronologically based in the last season, their last dance. But as you're seeing with the Bulls' last dance, the last season is such a grind and it's such a slog that you don't want to be grounded chronologically in that season. It does things to people that create drama. It wears on players. The 82 game march into 20 games or whatever the playoffs is going to be. So that can be interesting, but day by day, it's just brutal. And so I thought at a certain point, I just want to write about the characters and the features of this that are interesting to me and factor into the theme of this quest for success and really the lack of fulfillment one finds in it. And so I just wrote, I tried to anchor certain chapters and certain characters. You get your Steve Kerr, you get your Bob Myers, and in many ways, I didn't focus too much on the players just because I thought it had been done to death. That these guys have been such an object of fascination that not only will it be difficult for me to tell you something new, to be honest, you kind of get it. It's not like when you meet Draymond in real life, he's like a shrinking wallflower and he's shy. Like you kind of when you watch the All the Smoke episode that he does with Steven Jackson and Matt Barnes, yeah, that's Draymond. And by the way, that's Draymond in pretty much every setting. I don't think there's been any setting where people have gone like, oh my God, this is not what I expected. And yeah, there are aspects and features to their personalities that don't meet the eye. Steph can have a bit more of an edge. He's got a pretty good sarcastic wit, and sometimes you don't always see that. But for the most part, with the top level guys, with Steph, with Clay, with Draymond, with KD, who I did focus on because I thought he in some ways was almost an illustration of the modern NBA superstar and the kind of depressive ennui that's coming with all the attention. So he, in a way, could symbolize everybody. But I didn't want to do the whole athlete aspect to death, because when you're writing articles at whether it's ESPN or The Athletic, we know that that's where a lot of the focus is of the fans, is the players 1,000 times over. So we've written so many articles about them, and I just wasn't so into recapitulating the stories that have been done again and again and again and again. So basic thought process was anchor it in a theme, write about these guys, and maybe sort of start at the beginning of the team getting bought and then end at it all having fallen apart and looking to the future. So I don't know if that made any sense to the reader or to myself, but that was basically what I was trying to do.
It made total sense. But before we actually go on, I didn't even realize this until just now. My name is Marcus.
Hey, Marcus.
That is George.
Hey, George.
How's it going?
Kellen could not make it because Kellen is a funny individual who doesn't know how to read time. Huh? So, but yeah, we're doing this for his podcast. We're pretty good friends with Kellen, and so we featured on his podcast multiple times. So it was our idea, to read the book, but also to talk about it. But then I kind of got the idea, shooting a shot to see if he wanted to come on and talk about it. So
yeah, I saw this. I think you tweeted. One of you guys tweeted. I think added me in the discussion of it. And it didn't occur to me that anybody would be doing this in the aftermath of the book, that they would be doing almost a book club view of it. So I thought it was really cool. And I actually went on a run and I started listening to it, and I was just, okay, this is really interesting to hear them talking about it. But then you guys started talking about sneakers, and I'm like, oh no, these are some sneaker heads. They're gonna start with the Jordan 11s, and then there's like, I don't know, like an hour left, and they're gonna get Penny Hardaway. That's gonna get brought up probably along the line somewhere. And you guys just went, and I get it, I love sneakers, but you just went like right into Sneakerville.
Well, we took a hard right turn, very hard right turn into sneakers.
So that was not so much the book, but it was an enjoyable conversation, and I'm appreciative that you all read the book and are making content with it. So yeah, I'm happy to do this. I'm happy to drop in.
Well, actually, that was actually the second episode that we recorded about your book. The first episode, we actually do discuss your book. The first 3 chapters of the book pretty intensely. Yeah, the second one, it was mega detour to Sneakerville. So, but
well, sneakers, sneakers are a big chapter in the book. That's my favorite chapter, actually, of the ones I wrote. I think that's a big thing, and it's a thing that's now more known to be a big thing by journalists and writers. It's crazy. I wrote this article that I think probably led to the whole book getting made on Steph Curry joining Under Armour and leaving Nike. And I couldn't get anybody. I was at ESPN at the time. I couldn't get anybody to really greenlight that. And eventually I got the green light on it, and I wrote it for ESPN, the magazine. And it was cut from the hard copy of the magazine because I think for a lot of executives who don't understand that there's this vast subculture of sneakerheads and that this is billions and billions of dollars, it's why are we writing about sneakers? We write about basketball. This doesn't make a lot of sense. And so it was cut from the magazine, but then it was posted online, and it's the most well-read thing that I'd ever done. Like, it got 6 million. I mean, it sounds braggy, but it got 6 million unique page views. And nice. I think it was an example of not me being hot shit or anything. It was just more, this was a massive market inefficiency of a subject that if you got into it, there's a tremendous amount of interest in it. That just doing things the way we've been doing things, we hadn't really been able to get at. And I still think people don't understand from a journalistic perspective how to approach it, because I think the lesson that ESPN and others might have taken from that is we need to talk about sneakers in this info, what is the term? Sponsored content kind of way, where it's just like, oh my God, look at PJ Tucker's sneaker collection. And he's got a great sneaker collection, no doubt, but that's not what's interesting. What's interesting is what's going on in these meetings at Nike and at Under Armour, where they're vying to try to get these guys to sign. And frankly, fans and readers, they can smell when it's real and when it's authentic, and when it's stuff maybe the corporate chieftains don't want you to know, and they can smell when it's effectively an advertisement posing as a journalistic article, and they tend to reject the latter.
I'm guessing on the West Coast, before Steph, his career blew up and signing with Under Armour, I'm assuming on the West Coast, like, UA was not really a big brand.
It's funny. I'm actually wearing a shirt that has UA on it unintentionally. I don't think much of them as a brand, and I have Nikes, so I'm not trying to seem like a UA spokesman. But yeah, they didn't have it. They're like UA's presence, I feel, it's like where it's humid in the United States. It's like suburban, southern. That's kind of where their footprint is at. But they've tried to go heavy into basketball, and I think if I was writing another article, I might start asking the question of why they couldn't sign other guys. I mean, that's what's weird about how it's gone. They've gotten a few other guys, but they haven't gotten a superstar after Steph. And I think a lot of that is Nike with a bigger bankroll defending their territory. But yeah, they didn't have much of a presence out here. Suddenly they had a presence, and there was a rise and there was a fall, and now they're not in a good position.
Because those next level of guys that would have come after Steph that Under Armour could have signed, like Kyrie, like Paul George, have all done their lines with Nike, and pretty much to some pretty good sustained success, especially for Kyrie.
Yeah, and Under Armour tried to get some guys when they were younger. I think Moutier was somebody they took a bet on, and that bet did not work out.
Yeah.
So maybe Moutier plays better or does better. But that's what's funny is that you're almost a scout. You're almost doing it whether you're an agent or you're a sneaker company. You're almost looking at the game like a general manager, because it's a question of what guy can I find who's an unsung talent, who's going to blow up after we sign him to a reasonable deal, who's really going to help us. And maybe UA just needs a better scouting department because they haven't gotten one of those guys.
Marcus, this will give me a good segue back to the book, which is, of course, The Victory Machine, The Making and Unmaking of the Warriors Dynasty. Ethan Strauss from The Athletic, San Francisco, joining us. It's the making and unmaking of the Warriors Dynasty, but it could almost be the making of what we consider the modern NBA. I like in a couple of different places throughout the book that you go down avenues that have been talked about, from, the mental health of players to the sneaker wars, as we just talked about. Ownership and how, billionaires behind closed doors are just throwing unheard of sums of money to get involved with these teams. The making of the modern NBA player, the modern celebrity NBA player that has more power now than they ever had before. Was that intentional, or just kind of in your research and going through everything, your work kind of led you down these avenues to talk about things that not only affected the Warriors, but the league as a whole?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both. I mean, my mentality when trying to do a project like this is, can I get this to cross over in a way? Can I get this to be more than what it's specifically about? And I don't even know if I succeeded in that, because I know people who aren't big sports fans who read it and enjoyed it, but I know other people who read it and some of the names are unfamiliar to them, and they can't track certain aspects of it. So there's always that question of expository. Is this something that's going to be informative to the hardcore fan who is going to, it's going to be most of the people who buy this book are going to know pretty much everything and not need a lot of hand-holding? But will it also double as entertaining for somebody who doesn't know all that stuff? And with the latter, I'm not sure, but I'm always thinking about, can this cross over and get more people than just basketball fans? With the Nike Under Armour stuff, that could be appealing to somebody who likes business and thinks about business. That could be that. Somebody who thinks about social media and what it's doing to our brains and what it's like for famous people and celebrity culture in general. Maybe they could like the focus on Kevin Durant in that particular chapter. Somebody who thinks about leadership and motivational techniques, they might read the Steve Kerr chapter and get something out of that. So there was a little bit of a lack of intentionality, but it's all driven from that perspective of, can I find a thread that is going to relate to more than just this?
I think you did a pretty good job, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
I've been into pro ball like most of my life, but I still felt the book sort of really able to engage with people that maybe they just have like a passing sort of interest in basketball. Maybe they got into the Warriors only because they were like so good. Maybe they, like you said, like they just like the sneakers and like the business aspect of it. But I do think that the book is able to grab the reader, regardless of the sort of level of like, their level of relationship with the NBA. But speaking of that, speaking of sort of like, the basis of maybe who grabs the book or not, I wanted to actually ask you a little bit about yourself. Kind of what was your sort of history with basketball growing up as a kid, and what made you want to get into sports journalism?
That's a great question. I think what it was for me was, this might be getting a little too deep. I had a difficult relationship with my dad. My parents were divorced. By, I think, high school, I just lived completely with my mom. But my dad was a huge Knicks fan back in the 90s. And despite whatever difficulties you might have had, it was a lot of fun to just watch those NBA and NBC Knicks games together. And I don't know if I was trying to chase that the whole time in whatever I was doing and however this wound up the way it wound up. But I do wonder about that. I do wonder whether that might be why I'm returning to that particular place. But growing up, I played basketball. I think I always enjoyed that I'm better at basketball than I look. And so there's always a little bit of, I mean, I'm not Uncle Drew level, especially now. I've kind of fallen apart. I played in the media game at the finals last finals, and like I had the handles, but I wasn't quite finishing at the rim. And like that goes away, man. It really goes away. But yeah, I played point guard growing up, traveling basketball, high school. Eventually I quit though. I quit in junior year. Just because we had actually gotten too good. The coach.
Shit.
Well, the coach. Shit. Well, the coach was. Well, the coach. No, not like that. Like the coach was doing the thing where you have the fake addresses, so you can really stack the team because he ran like the San Diego version of AAU back then, High Five America, and so the team was stacked. And he basically said to me, you can still be on the team. I know that minutes are more sparse, and I was a little quitter, I think, at that point because the practices were long, and I didn't really want to come off the bench and be practicing 2 hours a day and do that whole thing. So I just kind of stopped at that point. And I don't know if I regret it or not. I don't know because they nearly won the state championship. So I don't know if it would have been a great experience to sort of ride the bench for the most part and try to have a moment. I still don't know, but what's great for my position is it's sometimes hard to get picked, but then it's really easy to overcome the expectations. And so that's a cool thing. That's a cool thing about basketball for me. And I kind of wound up in this whole whatever it is I do by a little bit of happenstance. A buddy of mine said he heard there was a job at the NBA when I was graduating college, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no clue. I applied for the job, and it was an NBA PR. And what I did was basically wake up at 4 a.m. every day and read literally everything written about the NBA. Everything. And then I send a memo out to David Stern and other people on
nice.
who we needed to have executed or whatever. I mean, back then you could literally read every newspaper article in America on the NBA. We're talking maybe 2009. So you could actually do it, but it was a miserable job, but it made me read a lot of what people were writing and then start thinking to myself, this might be a cool thing to do. Instead of doing what I do, maybe I want to do what these people are doing. And you get to go to games for free, and this could be a cool pathway. So that happenstance job kind of set up the rest of what I was doing.
It's a good pivot into probably arguably the most notorious event of your career when Kevin Durant mentions your name in a press conference. and you kind of touched, in the old days, if you were a columnist per se, you could write a column, it gets printed in the newspaper, somebody sees it, and then maybe you don't hear about it until later that day or the next day. But when it happens in this day and age in a press conference, it's almost instantaneous that it rattles around the echo chamber. So when you're in the middle of that, and for perspective, my background is in journalism from West Virginia University, where Marcus and I went, and I got my master's at Maryland. And so coming from a journalist perspective, when you're in the middle of a storm like that, how do you react? And you touch on it, kind of like you're seeing all the criticism coming in. You saw Tracy McGrady criticizing you, but Dan Patrick was in praise of you. Like, what goes into that? Do you have to just shut down completely? Are you looking to colleagues for affirmation? How did you work your way through that and to be able to continue to work and do your job effectively, even in the midst of all of that?
Okay, so to take the first thing that you said and then circle back to the question, just because I haven't talked about this on other podcasts, but it is an interesting distinction between the past and how it is now. A lot of the time I'll hear we just don't have access like we used to. And Bob Ryan would, he would get drunk with the players after the games and he'd go to steak dinner with Bill Walton and blah, 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 blah. And that's true to a certain extent. But what writers are not honest about is the real reason that coverage has changed and perhaps gotten a little bit less honest. Which is that the players can clap back, which they deserve to. That's something that they should be able to do. Like, they can do it immediately. And not only can they do it immediately, they'll see it immediately, to what you're saying. So back in the day, columnists used to write their hit pieces or whatever you want to call it when the player was going on a road trip, and the player might never even find out about it back in the day.
Shit.
because he's across the country. The newspaper comes, people read it, and then he's back 2 weeks later. I mean, that is the distant past. So that's not today's world anymore. They're going to hear about everything, and then they're going to respond on their own newspaper effectively on Twitter. And so that has created a dynamic where I think people are a lot more reluctant to criticize because they don't want to get put on that Summer Jam screen. I don't think a lot of other people wanted to be in the situation that I was in, because it's an uncomfortable situation. And it's one that comes with the territory, and every job has its downside. But to what you were saying about how you handle it, it's almost like when you're in a riptide or something like that. You don't want to panic and just do activity for its own sake. You don't want to start thrashing in the water. You have to calm down. Okay, what do I need to do? What do I not need to do? And to my mind, what you don't want to do is you don't want to mediate this stuff all on Twitter. It's like being in quicksand. That's not a good medium. That's not a medium that makes you seem reasonable. It's a medium where people can excerpt what you're saying, and
it's for the unreasonable takes. Yes.
Yes. It's not a good place. So I thought about it overnight. My boss said you should probably write something, and I put a lot of focus into writing a response to why I wrote what I wrote. And my feeling on it was, okay, whatever I did, whatever I didn't do, however people are mad at me, at least I am creating content for my shop, for my place of business, and somebody would have to subscribe to read. So at least I'm taking care of my employer. I'm saying my piece. People can like it. They cannot like it. It is what it is. And beyond that, I'm not going to say anything on Twitter. I'm not going to argue anything I see on Twitter. I'm not going to pour more gasoline on this fire. I'm going to, when local radio wants me on, I'll go on local radio. At least people can hear you're a human being. They can hear your voice like they can with Twitter. But you just try to not be too defensive, even if people are attacking you, because ultimately, the other thing you have to remember is that nobody cares about you. Nobody gives a shit. Nobody cares. They might not like you or whatever you stand for, but they don't care if you're emotionally distressed by this. There's too much going on in the world. You are a content provider to them. And so if I'm in public wallowing about how this all makes me feel in the moment, and how wronged I've been, those might be real sentiments. Those might be real feelings. I might be right in feeling them, but there's nothing in it for the customer. So you just try to bring it back to the customer. That's your lodestar in the way, is that even if the customer is mad at you, you have to have a logic in your head of, I'm doing what I can to provide you a look at what's going on and serve your interest. And that's what I'm trying to do. And so long as that's what I'm trying to do, and so long as that's what I'm focused on, I can't get too bent out of shape by any other noise. So that's how I try to approach it.
Man, I'm not gonna lie, Ethan. Like when it first came, like when it first happened, I was so embarrassed, like because I knew because the shit. Well, full disclosure, like I was born in DC. I grew up in Maryland, suburban Maryland. So like Katie is a person who he's basically what Lim Bias should have been, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when he was like throwing dirt in your name, it was kind of like, bro, like I live like 3 different time zones away from this writer. I know who the fuck he is. Like I listened to Count the Dings Network, shout out to Jay Hoyt and Big Waz and all that.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of like, you're trying to tarnish someone who does have skin in the game for it, for what reason? And I felt really bad for you, and also felt kind of like icky because it's like you do have a point, like these athletes can clap back at these reporters and these journalists, but at the same time, like, are people just going to believe him now to say Ethan Strauss is a person who doesn't have any connections?
Well, here's what people are going to believe. They're going to believe whatever they want to believe. That's what I've learned based on the internet. Whatever narrative is the narrative that you want to believe in. If you want to believe that KD is leaving because who knows why, maybe you're a Knicks fan, maybe you're a Nets fan, then I'm right as rain. But if you're a Warriors fan who wants to believe that KD is loyal to the Golden State Warriors, despite never having made any indication the entire season that he has any intention of re-signing at all. None. But if you want to believe that, then you're going to try to buy into the notion that it's the media trying to get clicks, stir up controversy. That's what you want to believe, so that's what you're going to believe, and that's just how it is. And ultimately, it was emotionally uncomfortable, but it was a gift to me. It helped publicize the book, and thanks to him for that, I suppose.
One of the more interesting things about him, and the thing I found in one of the more interesting things in the whole book, is about his mother Wanda. And as Marcus mentioned, Marcus grew up in DC, in Prince George's. I live in the DC area normally, and went to school in Maryland, and he loves the area, gives back. He comes back every summer. He's got his name.
He's got a Maryland tattoo, if I recall.
Yeah. He's got the Nats.
Yeah.
He's got everything. He's got a Maryland tattoo. He's got the Nats curly W. I think he's got the Redskins logo, everywhere. And
that's trash, though, by the way.
There's this, and it's interesting because, you go from Oklahoma City Kevin to Golden State Kevin, and it's like, what the heck happened here? And the nugget you have in there about how he decided to take control of managing the business side and the finances away from his mother when he came to Golden State is really interesting to me, because that's when I think we see the shift, because Kevin Durant wasn't always this bad guy, and Nike even ran an ad campaign years ago. Kevin Durant is not nice, to try and play up the aspect like he seems like this kind guy, but he's not really. And then he gets to Golden State and he bears it out, actually. And so how big of a factor was kind of that disruption in the relationship with his mother in maybe changing his outward energy and appearance toward people in the Bay Area?
Yeah, it's one of those things that's really tricky and it's really fraught, because you don't know everything going on with those dynamics and you don't want to speculate. But a lot of people did. A lot of people with the team did notice her absence, and her absence seemed to correlate with him not being in the best of moods. And, you don't know financially quite what happened there. Was it theft? Was it accidental? Who knows? But this is a dilemma that many of us face in our lives when it comes to family members, where they present a lot of complications, and in some ways they might betray us or undermine us, but who are we without them? And if we completely cut them out of our lives and take all the good things away, then are we going to be worse off for it? So I think that's something where God knows, who knows all the dynamics of that relationship. But it certainly seemed that without her, he was in a bad place, and just cutting out a lot of people and kind of making Rich Kleiman the orchestrator of your entire existence might have had its downsides. And that's really unfortunate, and it's tough. And he's a guy who's been through a lot of very tough circumstances. So as much as I don't love a lot of how he handles things and a lot of how he deals with people, there is an understanding of how it could get there, if not an empathy that's not grounded in experience, of not grounded in knowing what it's like, but just wondering that, man, if it was like this for me, I don't know how I would have turned out.
Yeah, man. Well, speaking a little bit about that, as far as it's kind of like KD's sort of legacy. I feel like personally, like I would say, I think people who are really into basketball and like kind of know the game, like, I think we do know sort of the special player that KD is. But I think sort of like the general, like even Twitter sphere, it's going to take a while for people to actually be removed from the Warriors dynasty to actually appreciate what KD was actually doing. But from your perspective, Ethan, what do you feel like Kevin Durant's legacy is going to be like 5 years, 10 years from now? Let's say, he's in Brooklyn and maybe they win a championship, or maybe they never do. But what do you think like his legacy is going to be in the Bay Area?
Man, it's so crazy because it's not completely fair. It's not completely based on just how good you were. He wants it to be. In his vision, he reaches this level of being great and then he gets everything that comes with it. He gets all the rewards, and we all say, hey, you're better than LeBron. We throw rose petals at your feet, and you're now the number one guy at Nike. But it's not, life's not totally like that. You know, Kevin Durant wakes up after winning the championship and beating LeBron and winning Finals MVP and turns on the TV with this expectation that all these sports pundits that he's been ripping and yelling at in their DMs are suddenly going to go, this guy's amazing, he's the number one player. No, they didn't do that. And maybe there's a connection. Maybe if you've been kissing their ass and doing the proper PR, they would have given you all those rewards. So I guess that's a long way for me of saying that he might never really get the credit commensurate with the skill level and with the accomplishment. There will be people who will make the case. There will be people who will look at the stats. But is it a Maya Angelou quote about people will forget everything else, but they'll remember how you made them feel? There might be a little bit of that, where he presently is not having a legacy that a lot of people are interfacing with it that way and saying he made me feel great. He made people in Oklahoma City feel great, but now there's this bitter tinge to it. There's a bitter tinge to it at the end, and they don't feel great when they think about him. And, you know, for a time he helped make the Warriors fans feel great, but it didn't end too amicably. I mean, he's never said anything about them on the way out, by the way. He's never said thanks to the fans or anything like that. And so I just wonder, I see him having almost a Wilt Chamberlain legacy where people will talk about how impressive he was, but he won't have any just stands, for lack of a better word.
Before KD signed to Golden State, did anyone predict like this kind of fallout? Like, was there like some random beat writer that was like, yo, I don't think this KD shit's gonna work out?
So it's funny. I think the Warriors told themselves, and if I was redoing, and I think for the paperback version, I might add some things, but I think the Warriors organization, because you have to convince yourself of the narrative you want, they made a lot about Westbrook and OKC shortcomings. You know, that's why this guy is so unhappy with the situation. But when he sees what we do and he sees how we play, he's going to be made whole and he's going to love it. And it turns out, as with many breakups, there's fault on both sides. It's not just OKC. It's not just Westbrook and Westbrook's issues. KD has his own share of issues. And the Warriors, I didn't have nobody from Oklahoma City actually said, oh, this is going to be a rocky ride and this is going to end the way it ended. There wasn't much of that at all. And I think part of that might speak to the thing you were talking about earlier, where Wanda kind of receding into the background might have accelerated certain trends faster than what would have been anticipated.
Because he ingrained, you know, if I remember correctly, he ingrained himself in the community there, bought a house there. I believe his mother lived with him in Oklahoma City for a period of time. So, you know, a lot of that in how just didn't pan out in his move to Golden State. The book, again, The Victory Machine, the Making and Unmaking of the Warriors Dynasty, Ethan Strauss with us on Hyphen Nation. It's interesting, the end part, the unmaking of the dynasty, because now in our current circumstances where everything is on its head and we may or may not have a conclusion to this NBA season, it may be a truncated season, it may be bumped up to the next season. Is there an opportunity? Obviously, Golden State, you know, having an awful season this year, but is there any kind of opportunity that you can see being around the team and in your coverage that maybe that turns around just because of how up and down everything is, that maybe a lot more teams will have some start on an equal footing just because of whenever basketball does resume, whether that includes a completion to this season or it's just a brand new season, maybe some teams start on a more equal footing than they would have in normal circumstances?
Well, I think the gap year helps them just recalibrate and rest and also obviously get a draft pick. But who knows? I mean, this is all in flux right now because they are paying a ton in luxury tax. And if the salary cap just completely plummets in the way that it theoretically should, then that should make them economically completely devastated, except a lot of people are speculating that the NBA is going to step in and not allow that to happen because this is just an unforeseen, insane circumstance. And so a lot of the devil will be in those details. This is going to be like in 2011, where everybody got to amnesty somebody if they wanted to amnesty somebody after that collective bargaining agreement. I don't know. I mean, I don't know is an unsatisfying response, but it's really the only one I can give when we're looking at a situation where if the NBA cannot complete this season, that is, I believe, going to crack the CBA wide open and leave everything up to renegotiation, because the original CBA will not be honored if the season doesn't complete. So that's all on the table. And so I don't know what will happen. I think in theory, in the long view, they're benefited from getting a high draft pick and resting, but there are a lot of details right now, and it's all very much up in the air. And beyond it, everyone's focused right now on can they get the season finished? Can they play in Walt Disney World or wherever? And I'm looking at it thinking, how the hell are they going to have a season next year? I mean, the NBA arena is quite the place for a disease like this one. It is quite the vector zone, from just the people in the crowd and you're indoors, down to at the event level of the NBA. There is just so much. It's like a moving circus. It's like a traveling circus, not a traveling cocaine circus like Jordan was talking about, but just a traveling circus in general. And I do not know how they're going to pull that off. I mean, that's to me the biggest concern is how the hell to have a season next season versus right now the short term, which does seem possible. I can see them doing the Walt Disney World thing and pulling it off. But next season, man, I do not know.
I mean, yeah, I think one of the phrases I'm like really tired of from companies, when they hit you with the email, we understand these are trying times. Like I'm like so over that. But I mean, we all understand, like, yeah, like this is something like we haven't had to live through before. We're all trying to make the best of it. From being a writer at the Athletic, I don't want to use the phrase panic because I think that's kind of extreme. But how is kind of the morale of like the journalists at the Athletic, like in the NBA in general? Is everyone trying to stay, as creative as possible? Is everyone trying to stay in like good spirits, or how's it going?
Yeah, I think we're trying to be creative. We're trying to look at different ways to do things. It's a little hard. If you've got a kid, then your kid is home. If you've got no daycare opportunities, so it's difficult to do the sweat work that when it comes to creativity. And I think at the beginning we were trying to go for nostalgia and remember this movie, remember this player, and I don't think the fans were ready for that at that time. They still wanted to cling to the idea that this would all be coming back. And no, don't tell me about that. Tell me about the draft. Tell me about free agents. But now it seems like a lot of people are kind of giving up and they want the nostalgia as evidenced by The Last Dance being such a winner. So we're all still figuring it out. I think there's obviously concern if sports are stopped and your business is in making content and related to sports. But in a way, we have a little bit less exposure just because we can always find something to talk about. And frankly, our travel budget is totally slashed by this. Nobody's traveling. So all the money that we spend in flying around everywhere is temporarily halted. But yeah, if sports stopped for the next few years, I think we would be in some trouble. That's for damn certain.
So you're saying no top 50 Warriors of all time list from Ethan Strauss?
There might be. We might have entered the nostalgia zone. Personally, I watched a shitload of college basketball and Australian basketball this year, and so I want to go into that backlog and talk about the draft. That's more the focus currently. But yeah, there might be top 50 lists. I'm not the one to do it with the Warriors, by the way. Sometimes because I've been around the team for a while, I am, as Colin Cowherd once said, a young man who's been covering the Warriors forever. Which is funny when you think about the sentence, but people think that I know about all those old Warriors teams. I don't know about it. I grew up in San Diego. Warriors were never on TV, like never, unless it was a playoff game, and I wasn't necessarily invested in what those Warriors teams were doing. So a lot of the history, whether it's the 90s or the 80s or even the 70s, I only hear about it through other people talking about it. I don't have the kind of connection to it that I did with, frankly, the Eastern Conference teams of that era.
Sounds like a Chris Mullin retrospective is coming from what I hear. So
Yeah, not so much. What an accent that guy has, though. That guy's got a great New York accent.
Oh yeah, it's thick as molasses. I guess one last question before I get you out of here, because you covered the Warriors since forever, but but which team do you think is better? Do you think the 2016 73 win team is better, or the last the 2018 Warriors? Well, which one do you think is better?
Well, I think the 2017 Warriors are the best. That's the best team ever. And what sort of sucks and what makes it a little bit depressing and distressing in a way, they're the best team ever, and yet it's just because they have a decadent supply of talent. It's not the feeling that you got in 2016 where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts and everybody's playing their role and there's a synchronicity and there's a beauty to the whole thing. You know, the sad truth of sports is there is this just reality of talent, and it's not all about the chemistry and the caring and sharing. And it's funny, the 2016 team, that won 73 games, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts for that team. But that team would get its ass kicked by the 2017 team, where the whole is less than the sum of its parts, just because the sum of its parts are fucking ridiculous. Because the end of the game has Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Andre Iguodala, Kevin Durant, and Draymond Green. I mean, that's just stupid. I know people will say the Bulls are the greatest team ever, or the 96 Bulls and 72 wins and the championship, and you can only compare teams across versus their era, of course. But come on, I mean, like that Warriors team is so much that's stupid. That's a crazy level of talent. That's crazy. That's way better than Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Ron Harper. I mean, this is a great team. Dennis Rodman. That's a really cool team, but it's not at that level. It's not at that level of the 2017 Warriors.
Ethan, man, thank you for joining us, man. Thank you for
it's been
cursing.
awesome.
We definitely appreciate that shit. But no, like from like I said, like thank you for. Well, I didn't say this, but thank you for writing the book, man. Like it was a really enjoy to read.
It's a perfect time for starved basketball fans to enjoy something. So.
Yeah, man. I think you did a really good job with it. I know you said you may be adding some more additional, maybe paragraphs or even chapters for the paperback edition. But what you did for the book that you have right now, it's a really good read, man. So thank you very much for writing it. Thank you for your wife for putting up with you. And thank you for joining us, man. We definitely appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I'll put out my plea, my plug. If anybody who read it and liked it can give a 5-star Amazon review, I'm told that helps me a lot, and it really helps me get that paperback where it needs to be. So if anybody could do that, I appreciate it. Or subscribe to The Athletic. And thanks so much for reading the book and going through it. It's awesome, and you guys did a great job with it. Even if there was maybe just like 30 minutes too much sneaker talk. Just one note.
I tell you, so.
And how can you not bring up the Jordan 4s? Like the 11s, they're great, but they're almost a little too flashy and shiny. Like we'll another time we'll get into this, but it's
flashy sneakers. What is this?
I don't know. You know what it is? I got ridiculed by Mark Stein for showing up to a playoff game wearing some North Carolina blue 11s, and he pulled me aside and scolded me for doing it. So I think that's what that is. I think I'm still traumatized from that. But look, that's another topic. Thanks for having me. It's been great. It's been my pleasure to drop on by.
Thanks, buddy.
Appreciate it, Ethan. Thank you.
Yep.
The crowd can't see this on pop locking. Yeah. Oh man, that was good shit, man. Yes.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, man. And this fucking guy, Kellen. We need royalties on this.
I took screenshots for proof. Ethan Strauss and my small face up here in the same corner. I took screenshots.
Hilarious. Oh man. Yeah, man, that was good shit, man. I may try to edit this tonight and give it to Kellen. Um, I'll do a proper intro because we didn't introduce anybody. We just started talking. But
That's good. That's what I love about it is like it's better if you can just free flow like that, and then we do and then we add in the stuff after. And I tried to throw in my radio style, throw in the title of the book and stuff and everything as we go along. But no, that was awesome. That was awesome. We hit on everything. He was great. Um, Between the two of us, we literally checked off all of my boxes here: KD Legacy, Modern NBA, Wanda. How he dealt with it. And your question was good too. Like, how'd you get your start in journalism? Because I love that, because that's like me. I'm still trying to do this. So, yeah, everything was awesome. That was great. And we've still got the final chapters of the book to, technically review too, which we'll do, at a later point.
Yeah, man. Do you want to get into sports journalism?
Yeah, it's still man, Marcus, that was the goal. Like I did almost, we had Kellen. Like Kellen could have been part of the sports staff at U92, even though he was on the DJ.
Oh wow, I never
staff.
knew
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Because he would always laughing because he'd always come in. He'd have his hat. I don't want to put him in jorts, but I can't remember correctly. But I feel like he might have worn jorts once, but we all did, so it was a thing. But I can remember him walking in the back door and he just had like commanding, like, oh man. And he was always wearing a Bulls jersey or Red Sox jersey or something like that. And so I was an Indians fan, and like they lost in 07. He always gave me shit about it because the Indians were up 3-1 in that series. And then of course they pissed it away like they do. But no, like, so that's kind of how we, got into each other. But I was on the sports staff. So we did, sports update and women's basketball and hockey and our baseball games and our sports talk show and all that. And then I was on WVU News, which was the TV stuff. So I got, did like sports anchor for, twice a week. We had our TV show. And so that's what I wanted to do. I love radio more than I love TV, and I always have. But kind of like TV was where the jobs were, but it was literally just like now, where it was a recession and people were getting fired and laid off and everything sucked. And so I was here at home for a year and then applied to everything I could find. And I moved to DC because I applied to be, work at the visitor center there because I worked at the visitor center at WVU. So I figured that was something, and it was a job that paid money, and I'd been in the house for a year not doing anything. So I moved to DC, and then 10 years later, meeting people, worked in politics in Congress for 7 years, and then went back to Maryland and got my master's, and then came back here. And my mom was sick and she passed away, but I was here, with her for a couple of months before that. And then I went back to DC, worked in Congress again, and then now finally got a job where I do podcasts and all the stuff at the time. So, but no, the goal was still to do it somehow in a sports capacity, which is a little bit trickier these days. Because again, jobs are tight and everything like that, but that's still the goal. So this is at least somewhat closer to it than I was before, which is good.
How's so it's Washington Times, right?
Yeah. So
it's how's the sports coverage there already?
So we only years ago, so it's like the conservative alternative to the Post basically. But years ago it was kind of like a full service DC paper, like local and sports and everything like that. And now we've got, one girl is the local reporter and she just does local stories. We have two sports, Tom Lavero, who you might have heard his name before. He's like a DC sports columnist. Guy's on 106.7 The Fan and all that. He's been around for years. So he's the sports columnist. Adam, who's a friend of mine that I met at Maryland, and Matt are our two sports guys. So they both cover the Redskins, the Wizards, and the Nats and Caps. But that's about all that we have there. But if one of them leaves, I'd like to do some maybe transition into something like that, which would be fun. But we don't have much in the way of sports coverage anymore, just those two. I mean, we cover all the teams and everything like that, but they can't be at all the games, but they're at most of them. So
yeah, I'm guessing, even being in DC, like the press coverage is always about the White House, a bulk of it at least now. Yeah.
Well, and like the interesting part, and as I've said multiple times, Mike Osti always gets on me. Like I love The Athletic just because like I can pick and choose from literally anything in the country. And I started reading it because my favorite Penguins writer, Josh Yohe, who knows me and Mike, jumped from the Pittsburgh paper to there. And then it's like, oh, I can read about the Indians. I can read about this and that. And so they built it up. and DC was like the last major city to get, kind of its Bureau of the Athletic, and David Aldridge is the
Yeah.
editor in chief. So David Aldridge left, and I didn't realize this because he's, DC guy through and through. He was living in DC and then like flying to either Atlanta or flying to games his whole life, covering the NBA based out of DC. And so he left Turner and said, he's the editor of the DC, version of the Athletic. But it's weird because, like, from Morgantown and maybe just kind of seeing like how Pittsburgh sports are and everything, like Pittsburgh sports are crazy. Like,
Yeah.
Ben Roethlisberger, says something and it's the top story on the news, not the top story in the sports section. Like it's the top story at 5 o'clock on the news in Pittsburgh. And that's just how it works. And that's like kind of how I grew up and everything. And in DC, it's crazy because there's crazy passion. This is me going on like a thing here, but I'm going. There's crazy passionate people there, but like it doesn't poke through in the coverage sometimes. And like
they need the Redskins. Like if the Redskins
like,
were like 14-2, it'd be first page.
And so that's like the most ridiculous thing that like kind of being there. And so like lived through seeing the Caps win. And I don't like the Caps, obviously, but it was awesome just because like people were happy. Finally, everybody's like, "Oh man, sports suck here." And I was like, "We got Ovechkin, you got Bryce Harper, it's like some good teams here." And then the Nats won, and then that was great. But no, it's like if the Redskins, God forbid, the Redskins ever go back to the playoffs and win a Super Bowl or something like that, apparently, it's just going to be a fucking party for weeks, everywhere.
It's not apparent. Like trust me, like growing up in DC, like. Even if you remember, those like 90s like Bullets teams when they had like potential, like no, like we had Ovechkin. He was great all these years. He didn't win. They finally win. That's good. Had the Mystics. They finally won. Good. The Nationals. We had Bryce. We were super excited. He didn't win shit. Got rid of him. We won. Good. If the Redskins win the Super Bowl, I guarantee, like, no matter where I am, like I didn't even really watch last season NFL. If the Redskins win the Super Bowl, no matter where I am in the world, I'm flying back for the Super Bowl festivities. It's gonna be fucking mayhem. Like that's how it's gonna be nuts.
And the crazy thing with basketball is because, like, as I've said before on here, like I didn't have an NBA team, and then my roommate's, huge basketball fan, and so kind of got into the Wizards, and now I have the Wizards. I kind of wanted to mention in the thing with Ethan, but it's almost a separate show we could do. Is the thing Friday? Is the basketball county in the water thing? The PG documentary. Yeah, and so I want to watch that and see all that because it's interesting to me how crazy passionate people are on the local level and the level of talent and DeMatha and Gonzaga and Markelle Fultz and Durant and Ty Lawson and all of that. And people are still passionate about Georgetown and they're still passionate about UMD basketball. And somehow the Wizards can't fucking make that connection between how strong in the youth local and basketball fever is in that region. It's the capital of basketball. Like New York in the 50s and 60s with like Lou Alcindor and all those guys, capital basketball. DC is a capital basketball now, period. Like I don't think anybody else has an argument. And the Wizards can't connect that to, come watch these guys play when there's only 6,000 people in the stands at the arena to watch the Wizards. And like that's mind-boggling to me.
Oh no, I know the answer. Like the reason they can't capitalize is because we'd gone so many years without having great talent. Like we had like the Wes Unseld and like those old Bullet teams, but when the 90s hit, like
sad,
it hit a rut.
Yeah.
Though like everyone in the city who grew up playing basketball, they only loved Jordan, they only loved Barkley, they loved all these people outside of DC. And so in the 2000s, like when we were in high school, basically, like if the Lakers came to town, it's like 90% Lakers. And so even when Jordan came to the Wizards, it wasn't Bullets Wizards fans. It was people that just wanted to see Michael Jordan play.
Yeah.
So I think even with like when John Wall was going off and like Bradley Beal, like the year that they lost to the Celtics,
Yeah.
and when they could have went to the Eastern Conference Finals, like that was the moment that we needed to capitalize to really get this shit going for
Yeah.
basketball. So they lost, and then we haven't been that good since. So like it's like a thing of like because I mean DC's a pretty big transplant city, so a lot of the home games it's gonna be a mix of both. Or if it's a good team coming into town, like it's gonna be people who root for that team more than they root
Yeah.
for our team. So like whenever like if Steph Curry is going off for like 50 points, we need people to boo him. Like we don't like if they're showing
Yeah.
highlights on Twitter and they're in DC and they're going on for points and people are cheering,
Man,
that's
those
just
dumb.
bad.
I've been to. I haven't been to a game in about a year or so, but like me and my roommate would go back. It was stupid cheap. Like we sat courtside in VIP for like $60 because you could wait on
Jesus.
StubHub. You could wait on StubHub until like an hour before the game, 30 minutes before the game starts, and like just snag the tickets because people were trying to unload them. And then we live in Arlington, so we would just hop on the metro and get over there real quick and just eat all the food, go crazy. But like, no, man, those even the fucking Knicks. Like, I've been there for a Lakers game, and it's crazy. Cavaliers game, they when LeBron was back with the Cavs and they had Kyrie and everything, and
Yep.
LeBron missed 2 foul shots in the fourth quarter, and everybody got a chicken sandwich. They were screaming like crazy, and Wizards somehow won the game.
I remember
But
that.
like,
I remember.
even the stupid Knicks would come into town, and it's like mellow, and just because all these New York people there, and it's like, I was like, they're the Knicks. I was like, they suck. Like, what?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
ridiculous.
man. Like in the I really do think actually, I said the Wizards losing, that was the moment. But in a fantasy moment,
Hmm.
if KD would have somehow got drafted by the Wizards and just stayed in DC his whole career, and then maybe like bring a championship to DC, like I think that would have been the turn because you would have had this DC kid, well, this Maryland kid, like backyard, like we can just go to the games, we can win over the crowds, and
Hmm.
even like KD did outplay LeBron. If it's a situation like that where he's outplaying like the best of the best, now you're not gonna need to root for LeBron. You're not gonna need to root for Steph like you have KD. So it's yeah, man, like it's
Well, and just like Grunfeld, like after they finally, it's just like, what in the world does Ted Leonsis have on Grunfeld that he keeps him employed? Because like he was the longest tenured GM in the NBA at one point, and for no good reason because like they miss on Jan Vesely, they Karan Butler, Kwame Brown, and it's like exactly what you're talking about because they go from Jordan, Stackhouse, it had names Jordan Stackhouse, Jameson.
yeah, the
And
the Arenas years.
Gilbert, yeah, and then obviously Gilbert does all the shit in the locker room and the guns and everything like that and goes nuts. But there's still this bad disconnect from like actually drafting talent that like could have complemented him when other teams were stocking up on that. Um, so yeah, it's just like a lot of missed opportunities there. But I hope one day that it'll just like come around for them. Like I know they're sticking with the Beal Wall model. I don't know if that's gonna be it. I feel like they need something else.
Yeah, they
That
need something else. Yeah,
but
I
like
mean that's I don't think they can. I don't think they can get anything else without unloading one or the other.
without
Like
them, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
like I didn't think they should have. I think they should have either traded away or let Bill go.
Hmm.
Like save the cap space, try to
Yeah.
draft and like build through there. But I think the next couple of seasons are going to be. I think at best, like if we would like if Wall's healthy and Bill stays healthy, I think we can get like like a 6 seed
Yeah.
max.
Yeah.
But it's like if Ryu if he doesn't if he's like just sort of like a middling player,
Yeah. There's another one. It's just like, I don't
yeah,
know if it was a reach or what, you don't want to criticize the guy because you don't know much about him. And he played at Gonzaga, came from Japan and everything. But it's just the Wall at least seen, yeah, like there was a time I think when you could have capitalized a little more on Beal's, starve and everything. John, for better or worse, he talks a big game and I hope that he backs it up. Um, but he seems like a guy that actually wants to be committed to the district and like do things in the
yeah,
community and be that guy and be a career DC guy, which is great. And then there's a whole nother shoe avenue there where he signed. My roommate sent me a picture of, I forgot he signed with Reebok and they had those weird zigzag shoe things at the, that was his
yeah.
shoe.
I
And then
remember
Reebok
those.
And then Reebok got bought by Adidas. And so, like, you know, he's kind of maybe missed out on some opportunities with that, but like he does seem committed to the region and to the city, which is a good thing. And at his position, you know, he could kind of be Chris Paul, where he has this long career and is still maybe not elite, but he plays like at an all-star, above average, all-pro level for a period of time if he doesn't get injured again. And so add one or two guys to that, and maybe it pops and turns into, you know, something, because those playoff teams were like Wall and Beal, but like I've said before, it was Paul Pierce the one year, and then Andre Miller and what's his Al Horford, and like that was, you know, those bench dudes were the ones kind of helping carry them to the second round that one year. So
I think with I don't think Porter. I would not describe Otto Porter as a bust, but for whatever reason, he just never maximized like his potential. Sure. Like he really should have been like a 3-and-D guy who can play stretch 4. We can go small ball with like him at the 4, Oubre at the 3, Bill and Wall at the 2, and then Gortat or Gortat's replacement at the 5. Like, but he didn't. It's weird. Like he didn't. Like, oh my god. Like I am kind of mad that like he kind of whiffed. I mean, he was a Georgetown kid
and local. Yeah, you know, played local. In college.
Yeah, man. But yeah, hopefully they get this shit together, man.
It feels like a big untapped. It feels like an untapped opportunity to me with how much people in the region locally, we're talking communities, you know, love basketball all around the DMV, and how if the Wizards like became hot or something like that, I think it'd be like wild. But yeah,
I mean, because it's from talking on Georgetown. Yeah, it was from those like 80 Georgetown teams. Then the 90s being competitive, and then even UMD and like the Steve Blake years.
Yeah,
like
Juan Dixon.
They had it, and then now that's
and like even now, like, you know, having been there, you know, I think people liked Turgeon kind of silenced some of the critics, because a lot of people were like, oh, we're you know, one and done, we can't make the Sweet 16 thing, and he's had his share of like what you could call early exits in conference and national tournaments, but has been able, at least in the last year, to placate some of that with some, you know, decent wins in the playoffs, in the tournaments. And then, you know, you send like Kevin Herter has been done really well with Atlanta, and they've produced some guys finally to send to the league that are maybe, you know, maybe give Maryland a second look in terms of recruiting and staying home. I mean, Mike Loxley's doing it with football, it looks like, to at least some extent, to keeping guys local. So maybe that kind of happens with basketball too, which would be nice.
Yeah, man. Good shit, George.